What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
So let's get into the show. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. It is Thursday, August 24th, 2017. Mike is in our control room ready to answer the phones, and boy, is there a lot of stuff to talk about today. Now, believe it or not, somebody won that Powerball. $758 million, a woman in Massachusetts, and everyone's excited about that, especially the state of Massachusetts, which is already drooling over the tax revenues they're going to collect from her. But I hope she's a fan of the show here. In fact, to be very honest, she looks like she could be family on my mother's side, because that's where we all hail from. I was born in Boston all the way back there. So hopefully she's a fan of this site, and we'll be hearing from her about when my birthday rolls around here in another 5 days. Now, if you're down in Texas, obviously you need to be hunkering down right now, and that includes all of our good friends over here at RBN, because Tropical Storm Harvey is heading on shore. It is expected to strengthen to hurricane force, become a hurricane again. It's coming on shore in the area between Corpus Christi and Houston. And they're already saying it's going to be at least 30 inches of rain. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has already declared a state of disaster for 30 counties going on in, and they're expecting major, major flooding. So if you're in the inundation areas, be prepared to move. Take good care of yourself. This is a nasty one. This is a nasty one. Another story that's kind of hanging out there, over in Charleston, South Carolina, there was an active shooter incident. Turned out not to be a hate crime or a terrorist. Apparently disgruntled employee, and last I checked, they're still trapped in this restaurant, Virginia's restaurant, and the negotiator is there trying to talk them on out. So it wasn't an act of terror after all. Now, I want to get on back to the incident with the USS John S. McCain, because the corporate media is really out there pounding on this story that the USS John McCain just couldn't be so dumb as to collide with another ship. Therefore, by default, it had to be hacked by the Russians, and all the online shills are already on over saying, oh, yes, it could have been done with this device, and this device, and this device. And every time you check out their claims and you get the technical specs for what they're offering, it doesn't do what they're claiming it's doing. And their entire argument is, well, the Navy couldn't be that incompetent. Therefore, by default, it has to be Russia. Look what they did to the Donald Cook. Yes, they could have seized the John S. McCain and driven it into that tanker ship. Well, again, go back and check your facts. What the incident with the Donald Cook proved is that Russia can jam radars, targeting systems, and paralyze weapons, but the Donald Cook never lost control of its engines or helm during the encounter. But they're out there pushing this agenda and just saying it's just impossible for the Navy to be this dumb. Of course it's possible. There's a long history of this kind of stuff going on, and followed by cover-ups. Now, you remember that incident with the gun turret on the USS Iowa, and it revealed a whole bunch of things went wrong. Mostly there was a brand new captain, inexperienced, and when he got on board the Aiea, he fired or transferred off his experienced command crew and brought in a bunch of his friends, and nobody could say anything about it because he had contacts up at the Pentagon. You know how the old boy network works. And so they were out there sailing on the Aiea. There was an admiral on board. The captain wanted to impress him. And they'd already had a misfire in one of the other turrets. And the captain said, keep firing anyway. And it led to this disaster. And the investigation was a total whitewash. Captain Joseph Michelli, the officer assigned to the inquest, had a conflict of interest because he apparently had supervised preparation of some of the gun propellant on board, which was later found to have been stored improperly and become unstable. And what actually happened is they had this unstable gun propellant. Apparently they were short one bag in that center gun, and the new kid that hadn't had enough training overrammed it. And because it was unstable from improper storage, it exploded. And the breech was open, and it just blew back into the turret, and it just shredded, all those poor people. But the Navy never does anything wrong. So what do? They blamed it on a gay sailor that they said was despondent over the end of an affair, and he committed suicide taking 46 shipmates with him. And that was the official story. And people were saying, that's utter nonsense. The Navy even went on out and hired groups of people with media support to go to the families of all of the 46 sailors and say, this is what happened. And overwhelmingly, the families said, this is a load of nonsense. Now, the Navy, ultimately, to prove that the propellant was safe, built what was called a drop test rig, where it was a section of 16-inch gun barrel, and they loaded it up with propellant bags and a shell, and they had a plunger on the bottom simulating the ramming. And the idea was they were just going to drop it over and over and over again to prove that over-ramming the powder would not set it off. They dropped it, it exploded. And all the propellant was destroyed. And the Iowa-class battleships turned into museum pieces. We have one of them down here in Pearl Harbor. That was what led to the final decommissioning of all the Iowa-class ships, was that gun incident. But for public consumption, it was a dead gay sailor. It was all his fault. All right, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the show. And we're trying to deal with this obvious piece of propaganda to once again frame Russia for something that appears, at least to me, to be accident and stupidity, which is the USS John McCain being struck by that oil tanker. And having spent a lot of time on the ocean, it looks to me like these Navy commanders are ignoring the international rules of right-of-way. They're getting reckless, and they're making mistakes. I mean, these are new kids. Remember when you were a kid and you finally got the keys to the family car? Admit it, you kind of pushed the pedal to the metal a little bit those first few times on out. Same thing, only with a lot more metal. And then we have, of course, the Point Honda disaster. And this happened a long time ago, and obviously it's not something the Navy likes to be proud about. But basically what it was, there were 7 destroyers that ran aground off Point Honda near Santa Barbara. There were actually 9 ships total. 2 of them were able to back off and get free of the rocks. 23 sailors died in the disaster. It was the single largest peacetime loss of U.S. ships in United States history. And they court-martialed the fleet commander and the captains of all the ships for negligence. And if you can get in there, you have to have permission from Vandenberg. But if you can get in there, the remains of the ships are still there. They run dive tours to that. 7 ships lost in a single day. Goof. No enemy action. The Russians didn't do it. The Russians didn't jam the computers on these Navy destroyers. Then we have how the USS Vincennes, the shoot down of the Iranian passenger jet. That's an accident. The accidental shoot down of TWA 800 was an accident. Something was done wrong. There was an incompetent. Then you had the USS Maine, which was officially declared the victim of a Spanish mine to launch the Spanish-American War, but Captain Sigsbee, commander of the Maine, said it was an onboard fire that got out of control. And this was later confirmed by an investigation run by Admiral Hyman G. Rickover. The Navy has major mess-ups, and they like to lie to cover it on up. Remember John McCain, Wet Start Johnny on the Forrestal? Destroyed enough U.S. planes to qualify as an enemy ace. Officially, it was an electrical fault. But people who survived the incident have gone public and said, yeah, John was doing wet starts. He wanted to spook the pilot behind him and accidentally cooked off a Zuni rocket, initiating the sequence of events. But because good old John McCain's daddy was an admiral, he got off scot-free. That's how the Navy, in fact, all military chain of command works. If you come from the right families, you can do no wrong. there was an incident in which there was a peacetime loss of a submarine called the USS Scorpion. And it simply vanished on its way back to the United States, and there was no communication, and the time when it was supposed to arrive at the docks came and went, and they didn't know where it was. And there was a very brilliant scientist named Dr. John Craven, and he was one of these whiz kids for the military, and when he retired, he moved out here to Oahu, and I had the chance to hang out with him for quite a while before he passed away. And he was the one who found where the Scorpion went by using data from the SOSUS system to track the submarine, and discovered that shortly before it disappeared, it had done a 180-degree turn heading back the way it was coming. And Craven understood that that is something submarine commanders are taught to do instantly if they have what's called a hot-running torpedo, which means a torpedo still on board the submarine, not in the torpedo tube, that activates. And the reason for that is the batteries and engines of the torpedoes can generate a huge amount of heat, enough to cook off the warhead. Normally when they're in use in the ocean, going through the water keeps them cool. If they're in the torpedo room, the heat can cook off the warheads. And so Craven basically said, yeah, they had a hot running torpedo and it probably blew up. And the problem was, it was known those batteries were faulty. There had been several incidents with those specific torpedo batteries. What did the Navy say? It was a sneak attack by the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union just decided one day, for no reason at all, to launch an unprovoked attack on a U.S. submarine. There are still people out there still pushing that agenda. Now then, this gets us to the Titanic. And no, the Russians didn't interfere with the Titanic either. But when Dr. Robert Ballard went to look for the Titanic, that was actually a cover, because his real mission was to locate and survey the wrecks of both the USS Scorpion and the Thresher. And what they found on the Scorpion was it had been crushed by the ocean, except for the forward torpedo room was intact, which meant it had been open to the sea on the way to the bottom. And that pretty much confirms Dr. Craven's theory right there. So this is how the Navy does these things. Somebody else's fault. We got to protect the careers of the founding families or whatever. And it does get rather ridiculous at times. Occam's razor. This is a goof. These are young people. They're probably not fully trained. We know that during Obama's administration, a lot of the old guard Navy commanders and planners and officials were urged to retire because they didn't believe in the liberal political agenda. And so what we have is this new Navy in there of politically correct liberals who lack experience. It is not easy handling those ships. Everybody has to work together perfectly. And again, in both the case of the Fitzgerald and the McCain, it looks to me that whoever was in command of the ship ignored the international rules of right-of-way, thought they could get around the front of these giant ships, and misjudged. And they got tagged. Certainly, the actions of the Navy are consistent with a finding of incompetence. The entire command crew of the Fitzgerald has been relieved of duty. In response to the McCain incident, they fired the fleet commander. That's not the sort of things you're going to see happen if it's actually suspected that this was an act of war by Russia. We're going to take a phone call now. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Peter, there you are.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up one more naval thing that a lot of people don't look at it that way, but it really was. By the way, you remember back in Aden Harbor, the destroyer that was hit with some boat or whatever, and
the USS Cole,
almost got some. The coal, right. And remember, that was in a peaceful harbor with no rules of engagement, in a friendly harbor, at anchor and all that, and that guy got cashiered. I want you to think back in August of 1943 in the Blackett Straits in the Solomon Islands. John F. Kennedy, Lieutenant J.G. John F. Kennedy, was in a PT boat that goes about 40 miles an hour and was on an open water and was rammed at night with a low silhouette, by the way, by a destroyer that's about 10 or 15 miles an hour slower, with a much higher silhouette, rammed in half. People died, right? People died in that. I grant you that Kennedy did well on the rescue thing, but
yes.
But somebody definitely was asleep at the wheel there. But Daddy had $300 million and was a big contributor and former ambassador to the Court of St. James for FDR.
There's a bit of a difference we need to keep in mind. In the case of Kennedy's PT boat, he's in a war zone. They're blacked out so that they can't be seen. It did happen at night, and probably over the roar of their own engines, the crew of both ships couldn't hear the other one out there. So I think that's you have to keep that in mind. In the case of the Fitzgerald, in the case of the Fitzgerald and the McCain, you're talking about ships that have full running lights on. And these tankers and cargo ships, which are brilliantly lit up at night, they want to be seen. And that's a very different environment from an active war zone.
I understand, Mike, but you can also see where it was. People died in that collision.
Yes.
And it's like a Mack truck being hit by, like a Maserati being hit by a Mack truck in an open, parking lot. And it never should have happened. But again, it was yet another example of family connections getting you off.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I agree with you on that because, again, being a war zone, they're not going to be following, the rules of navigation and right of way. I mean, we're talking about belligerent hostile forces. The question.
Well, they cashiered the guy, Mike, from the coal. And that was in a peaceful harbor at anchor.
That's exactly the point I'm making. That's exactly the point I'm making. Is that Kennedy was in a war zone, and they were, it was at night, and they probably both ships had their lights out because they didn't want to be seen from a distance by a possible enemy. So it's a very different situation.
Well, I would tell you that had that happened to another naval officer, again, a Maserati and a Mack truck at night, yeah. But look at the difference in the silhouettes, the huge silhouette of a destroyer compared to a almost nothing silhouette of a PT boat, and yet this guy got rammed in half. It never should have happened, but he got off. So, and by the way, this wasn't this was an active war zone when he should have been alert completely. Where the guy in Aden Harbor, who expects to be rammed by a boat and blown up? But whatever.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And I do think it's a case of apples and oranges. And the interesting thing about it was John F. Kennedy was down there in the South Pacific in what was supposed to be a rear echelon area. It surprised everybody when that Japanese ship showed up because John F. Kennedy had a reputation for getting with the ladies, and old Joe was already looking forward to John F. Kennedy's political career, and John just couldn't keep his fly zipped. So old Joe pulled some strings with the Navy and had him shift off to the South Pacific so he couldn't get in any trouble. And then he gets in that incident with the PT boat, he becomes a hero, and his political career is assured. Now, that being said, yeah, I understand. Having family money behind you and family connections can go a long way to helping your career. But I don't think it's appropriate to compare the tactical situation of John F. Kennedy with what was going on with the McCain and the Fitzgerald. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go right back to the phones. Jay, Michael in Ohio. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. How are you doing?
Hanging in there.
That's a good thing. I just wanted to find out. Yesterday, I sent you a couple of videos or links to videos, and I wondered if you got them and if you were able to watch any of them.
What were the videos about? I mean, I get emails with video links all the time.
I can imagine. This one in particular was about Shauna Cox and Laz Nassaro. Shauna Cox was in the vehicle when they murdered Lavoy Finicum.
Yes.
This had just recently been released, and there were edited versions of it, short versions of that video that were let out to the public. But it just came out the 17th of this month in full version, and it showed what actually happened, the entire run from when the state police pulled the van over and the one Bundy got out and they arrested him. Then Lavoy ran into that roadblock. That was a kill zone.
Yes.
They called these people, the FBI called them hostage rescue team. There were no hostages in that van. Shauna Cox was there accidentally. She jumped into that van right when Lavoy was pulling out. But they set it up on a blind curve so that he had nowhere to go but run into the snowbank. Excuse me. The snowbank was up to 3 feet high. The FBI lied in a press conference when they said that he was ordered to put his hands up and surrender numerous times, and when he didn't, he kept coming forward and they shot him. The video doesn't show that because it's from inside the van. They said he was only shot twice. He was shot 9 times. I mean, the thing is, though, I've been researching this case for almost a year and a half, trying to connect the dots, and this video does it.
Yeah, I'm looking at your emails here right now. I understand that Eric Parker and Scott Drexler will be tried again. In fact, actually went to trial yesterday. They're not wasting any time. They're just going to keep running through the kangaroo court until they get the result they want.
Oh, that's an insult to kangaroos.
Yeah, all right. I apologize. I apologize. I've only ever really met one kangaroo in my entire life, and I won the altercation. His hide is now serving as a rug in my living room.
Well, I hope the hair is soft.
It's wonderful.
Anyway, yeah. Anyway, the Finicum, Harney County deal, and the Bundy Ranch deal, they're tied together. They're linked together. They're all part of the same conspiracy. And this video proves it. They have documented evidence that Governor Kate Brown is involved in this, along with Anna Brown. This judge, she calls herself a judge, Gloria Navarro, who heard this case in federal court in Nevada. Oh, my God, the absolute corruption of this woman. She would not allow any defense witnesses.
Yes.
She had the gall to tell people that they were not allowed to mention the Constitution or have a pocket Constitution visible when they came in the courtroom.
Yeah, that's pretty tyrannical. But I mean, behind all of this, it was a land grab. They coveted the Bundy's ranch land. They wanted to sell it to developers, and we've seen the Bureau of Land Management do this, where they'll grab some land and say, "Oh, it needs to be preserved, it needs to be managed." Then 2 years down the road, the BLM says, "Well, it turns out this land really wasn't all that critical to the environment, so we're going to just put it up for sale to a private party."
Finicum's body wasn't cold before they started blasting on that property. There are witnesses.
Yes.
And guess who personally carried a sample of the yellow cake uranium that's under that land to Russia?
I believe that was Podesta.
No, it was not. It was Robert Mueller, the guy who's investigating Trump's
Oh, you're
Russia
right. You're right. It was Robert Mueller. Yeah. It's all about uranium, the Uranium One deal. I mean, these people are all getting rich by stealing other people's land with uranium underneath it. All right, Jay, we got to let you go. Take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Because we've had about 9 months of Democratic operatives leaking every piece of sensitive, embarrassing information they could get their hands on about the Trump administration to the New York Times and the Washington Post, over and above the fact that Hillary Clinton was mishandling, to be polite, classified documents. And so now that Breitbart, that Banning has left the White House and is heading back to Breitbart, Democrats are warning him not to publish any classified information on Breitbart. Don't you dare do it. That's our gig. It's amazing here. Now, as you know, the White House petition to declare Antifa a terrorist group has soared way past the minimum number of signatures required for a response. We're still not getting the response here. There's a new petition up, and it's already collecting a huge number of signatures as well. This is a petition to declare George Soros a terrorist and seize all of his related organizations' assets under RICO and NDAA law and civil forfeiture. And it's actually legitimate because George Soros, in funding these groups that are using violence to coerce a change to the political structure of our country, that is defined under the USA Patriot Act as an act of terror. So, yeah, I think it's an idea whose time has come. Meanwhile, the statue wrecking, monument burning, race baiting seems to be losing traction. It's like I was saying yesterday, nobody wants to be associated with either side of that debate because they both look bad. The black population do not want to be associated with Black Lives Matter and Antifa because of the way they behave. White conservatives don't want to be associated with the extremists on the other side because of the way they behave. And we know that all of those people are being paid to show up and act like that anyway. So it's not getting any traction. So meanwhile, apparently Sky News has interviewed the head of the Ku Klux Klan, basically saying that, yes, there's probably going to be more violence. And the argument being made is Antifa and Black Lives Matter are desecrating cemeteries and taking down monuments of American war heroes. And remember, under the law, members of the Confederacy are considered U.S. military veterans. And this head of the KKK is saying, we offer a whimper of protest at the desecration of cemeteries, and we're being called bigots, racist, and Nazis. And I'm not a big supporter of the KKK, but that's a valid point. There's a double standard here where the Black Lives Matter, Antifa can go on out with these acts of violence, disobedience, vandalism, and if anybody complains about, hey, maybe you ought not to behave that way, you're denounced as a racist, a white supremacist. CNN is still out there trying to promote Antifa and Black Lives Matter, trying to sell America that these are the good guys, not working. They actually put up a puff piece with the title, I'm not kidding you, Activists Seek Peace Through Violence. And then apparently somebody took a look at that on the screen and they yanked it, realizing how little sense it made. Now, there is another story that's coming on out. Apparently the Texas Rangers were searching an Antifa member's bag near a Confederate statue, basically looking to see if he was going to deface it. They found explosives. This Antifa member wanted to literally blow the statue up, not just content with paint or chisel marks. And of course, a complete disregard for any people who might be standing by when it went off. Now, polls are continuing to show Americans support free speech over political correctness. Polls are showing that Americans agree with Donald Trump. Both sides in this debate are behaving badly. And polls are still showing Americans overwhelmingly think those Confederate monuments ought to be left where they are. And if you have a problem with the monument to a Confederate officer, walk away. Look another direction. Nobody's forcing you to be there to look at this Confederate memorial. Just go on off and go someplace else. But when you have this organized group that are trying to erase our history, because it's not just the Confederates anymore. They want to go after George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Their attitude is if a historical monument or a piece of history offends anybody, it should be erased. Well, I mean, come on. In this world, if you erase every bit of history that offends somebody, there will be no history at all. Maybe that's what they want. Now, getting on over to the Imran Awan case, things may be about to heat up over there. Report in the New York Post is saying prosecutors are squeezing Imran Awan in a cyber espionage investigation. Additional charges and arrests are expected. They're starting to get to the heart of it. Now, here's the question. Given Imran's close association with Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Debbie Wasserman Schultz's close association with Hillary Clinton, we start to get a very interesting question. We know that the Awan brothers were stealing information from House member computers and selling it to foreign governments. It's a spy ring. Is it part of the same spy ring that Hillary Clinton was running? So hopefully Imran is going to understand his best option is to talk. And we know Hillary's trying to keep the lid on all of this stuff. Apparently, Huma Abedin is still on Hillary's campaign payroll. She's not doing anything, just getting the money. Sounds like hush money to a lot of people here. So as you know, well, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call. Steve in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, I sent you an email a couple of days ago about the illegality of AOL releasing Mike Pence's personal emails, and this is not government emails; these are personal emails. I would think that would be illegal, correct, or not?
Well, apparently, because Pence was using a private email account for state business under state law, it was legit to get those emails and make them part of the public record. But again, I'm very troubled by the fact that we have yet another politician who's attempting to conceal part of what they're doing by the use of a private email server. And again, if Pence had used the private email for his personal business, that would be one thing. But apparently he was conducting official business.
I understand. That seems to be a problem, ongoing problem for all our politicians, I would assume. Don't you think?
Yeah, it is. And it's kind of interesting where we have a government that wants our lives to be perfectly open and transparent for constant surveillance, and yet at the same time is trying very, very hard to evade the existing laws requiring government transparency. They don't want we, the voters, looking at what they're doing, apparently. And so we have all these stories about multiple Blackberries and private email servers and just trying to keep so much of their shenanigans out of the public eye. And again, we had the same argument over Hillary's email server. If it was used for her personal, private, business, family stuff, yeah, it's private, hands off. But if she was using it for official State Department business, and she was, you have to ask why. Why wasn't she using the secured system? Because we are, in fact, dealing with classified information that was made available to the world on a private email server with worse security than Ashley Madison. And even former...
You know, Mike, you've mentioned it on your show, and I think John's talked about it, and Ron McDonald talked about it, is the skipping of the protocol. Now, cutting a deal with Hillary Clinton on these 37,000 emails, they're kind of skipping over. You have to be indicted or charges have to be filed, but they're kind of skipping over that protocol of that process itself and then going right to cutting a deal. And other than RBN, I have not heard anybody in the mainstream media point out, wait a minute, how is that possible? You're kind of skipping over something here.
No, that's not the... No, when we're talking about a plea deal, that's very often offered prior to any indictment or charges being made, because the outcome of that plea bargain determines what charges are going to be filed. And in the case of the deal that they were talking about with Hillary, which, as far as I can tell, has gone nowhere at this point, but the idea was that Hillary would agree to accept being charged for this minor offense and she would plead guilty to it. And in exchange, all these other investigations into the email server and the foundation would be dropped, which is a sweetheart deal for Hillary Clinton. And because she's going to be charged with a minor offense, she's still eligible to run for the White House.
Amazing. Hey, thank you, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. All right, we're going to get into the war zones here, and there are so many of them. So more American troops to Afghanistan to keep the Chinese out. How about mine the lithium, the battle for Afghanistan's mineral riches? And everybody's out there saying, oh, why are we ramping up in Afghanistan? Only a couple of months ago they were saying it was time to get on out here. Well, I'm very gratified to see more and more organizations start to really look at what's going on in Afghanistan. And so over at MediaRoots, .org, they have an article, How Opium is Keeping the United States in Afghanistan, the CIA's Shady History of Drug Trafficking. And I've been saying all along, that is why we will never leave Afghanistan. As long as the poppies are blooming, the U.S. will stay in there. Because it's all about money and power, and nothing gets you more money more quickly than the illicit drug trade. And you make it much more profitable by keeping it illegal. A lot of people have called in to say, I've seen in other countries where they decriminalize these drugs, and the problems go away. The crime goes away. It's a manageable issue with the existing addicts, but you don't have dealers out there at the schoolyard offering out free samples to try and build their business. There's no point in it, because they can't make a huge profit if it's legal and under state control. Why don't they do that here? Why don't they end the prohibition to end the corruption? And the reason is because the corruptors are the ones who are profiting from the drug trade, and they don't want anything to change at all. I've been noticing on the recent DOS server attacks on my web server, the article about opium in Afghanistan is a favorite target of the DOSers. They'll go after that article hundreds and hundreds of times in the space of a minute, trying to drown it out, trying to keep that from getting on out. But the word is getting on out. This article in MediaRoots confirms it. Everybody is openly talking about the fact that the CIA is heavily invested in the drug trade. Kunsas heroin from Vietnam, cocaine from Central America during that whole Iran-Contra thing, and now more opium coming in from Afghanistan. And it's another reason why the U.S. would like to get into North Korea, because that's also a major source of opium poppies. And there's nothing new with governments getting involved in drug trafficking. Britain actually fought a war against China over Britain's imagined right to sell opium to the Chinese people. And amazingly enough, they bought that opium from right here in the United States of America, sent it across the ocean, sold it to the Chinese opium dens. And the corruption and the rot eventually brought down the imperial government and opened the way for the communist revolution. Now, interestingly enough, one of the families that was involved in what was politely called the China trade were the Russells. And the Russells used the money that they were getting from selling their opium to Britain. And yes, it was a legal crop at the time. It was looked down on for moral reasons, but it was legal at the time. And they used their money for various philanthropic endeavors, including a fraternity at Yale University officially called the Russell Trust. And you probably know it as Skull and Bones. And you probably also know that there's always been a very tight, close link between Skull and Bones and the Central Intelligence Agency. It's the politics of contraband. Now, getting on down to Syria, the Russian Defense Minister, Sergei Shoigu, has said that the civil war in Syria de facto is over. It's all pretty much done. There's mop-up, there's cleaning up areas. They have to separate the terrorists from the opposition. And, the de-escalation zones and safe zones. So it's winding down. And we've been saying that for a while. But golly gee whiz, just when you think it's all over, a second ISIS-held pocket just magically appears in central Syria. And they're back like a bad penny. ISIS is back causing trouble. I'm telling you, the U.S. is not going to let Syria out of their grip. They're just looking for a way to get it done here. Now, here's a weird statement coming on out from Erdogan and Mattis. Apparently, Mattis and Erdogan were having these talks, and Mattis has come around to agree with Erdogan about maybe the Kurdistan isn't such a good idea, because now Mattis is saying the importance of preserving the territorial integrity of Iraq and Syria, which, of course, was not the U.S. policies going into so many of these other places. But apparently Erdogan has made it very obvious that he will not tolerate the formation of a Kurdistan. And looks like Mattis may have backed down over that issue. Now, the problem with all these blinking and backing downs, and we are seeing a lot of them, they're couched in propaganda to make it look like the U.S. government is taking the high ground. Well, we're going to retire with dignity and we're doing well. But world leaders are starting to look at the United States as a paper tiger, and maybe not the invincible military that they once were, especially with all these stupid accidents with the ships. So apparently over in Germany, Merkel is now being encouraged by her advisors to basically campaign on a new resurgent German military to lead Europe, because of their view that the USA has in fact become weak. Now, up in Ukraine, apparently they've had a little bit of a security panic. Somebody with an untraceable IP telephone and a synthesized voice phoned in a death threat on Poroshenko's life, and they're taking it very, very seriously, as well they should. Poroshenko is not at all well liked by the people of Ukraine. So something dramatic may be happening there. Meanwhile, Ukraine, following Poland's demand for reparations from Germany, is now demanding 3 trillion rubles from Russia for Crimea. Apparently, Ukraine's new attitude is, yes, you can keep it, but you stole it, you're going to have to pay for it. I can imagine Putin's just going to be laughing himself silly over this one. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, Netanyahu finally got to meet Vladimir Putin and immediately went on a rant about Iran this and Iran that, and Iran can't be in Syria, and if you don't get Iran out of Syria, we're going to take action ourselves, blah, 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 blah. And apparently Putin just more or less ignored him, which I think is a suitable response. Because Netanyahu's out there saying, Iran is going to bring about the end of the world, the situation is unstable, it's all the fault of Iran. No, it isn't. Iran isn't the one that's in regime changing and drone striking and bombing and invading every country in the area. So, I don't blame Putin. I mean, certainly Netanyahu needs to understand something. Israel is not in a position to go to war against Russia, even backed up by the United States. Because Israel's a little tiny place, and it's not going to take too many bombs to basically make the whole thing pointless. I think Netanyahu is feeling the stress from his upcoming corruption trial. He's trying to get something major going so that his corruption trial does not make it onto the newspapers. And by the way, have you seen any report of it in the American corporate media? I don't think so. Meanwhile, proving just how butch they can be, apparently earlier this week, Israeli civil administration officials and security forces entered the village of Jub Adib, southeast of Bethlehem, and demolished the community's recently constructed school building. Now, the materials for this building were donated by the European Union to provide classrooms for Palestinians' children, and this is literally the night before the start of the Palestinian school year, and they just go on in and tear the school down. As Ron White would say, you have to be a real manly man to do that sort of thing here. Now, here's an interesting development. North Korea came on out with a statement that they are pursuing more solid rocket engine development. And they're going to produce more of these engines. This last statement, though, didn't have quite the bombast and chest thumping of earlier statements from North Korea, which led Trump to come on out with this rather bizarre statement that he respects the fact that Kim Jong-un is starting to respect the United States. And maybe something positive will come about. Now, my read on the situation is that probably because of the warning China issued that they would intervene in the event of a U.S. attack on North Korea, that maybe the U.S. is backing on off, and that's why they're shifting the emphasis back to Afghanistan. Oh, stop bothering us about North Korea. That was last week. We're back in Afghanistan. There's going to be opium for all. But it almost feels like North Korea is no longer at the top of the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. I'm going to take a break here. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're talking about North Korea and what may be a easing of tensions, a pulling back on this issue. And experts are basically coming on out and saying the same thing that I've been saying all along. With a clearly belligerent United States marching across the globe, every nation has a right to build a deterrent capability so that they'll be left alone. And so Dr. Andrei Gubin, who's an expert at the Russian Institute for Strategic Studies, said in an interview on TASS that the United States has no legal grounds for a military assault on North Korea. The entire ire seems to be the fact that Kim Jong-un refuses to bow down. And Kim Jong-un has come out of this confrontation looking really, really good, not just to his own people, but to many Asian countries in the region. They're saying, wow, if he can do it, we can do it. But absent a false flag, which is always still possible, the United States does not have legal grounds to just haul off and start invading North Korea any more than they did any of these other countries they've invaded. Then you have other countries that are saying, we're not going to be on board if you do this. Merkel has already sent a message saying Germany will not side with the U.S. in a war with North Korea. It says if there's an issue there, it has to be resolved diplomatically. So the U.S. government is not getting the support from the so-called coalition here. Meanwhile, down in Guam, they're feeling very twitchy there over all this idea that if the U.S. provokes a confrontation with North Korea, they're going to get caught in the crossfire, rather. They haven't done anything. They don't feel that they want to be dragged into this thing. Like the Okinawans, they're starting to get really upset over all the U.S. bases on their island. They don't want to be a target. And they're not happy with the presence of the U.S. military. All right, let's talk about the economic news here a little bit. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. Another brick in the wall. USA debt rating in doubt. Banks warn downturn coming. We're seeing this all over the place. There are all these indicators that behind all the manipulated stock market prices and all the absolute total fantasy unemployment and inflation numbers, there are some tough indicators out there that we're getting another recession. People are refusing to borrow more money because they're not confident they'll be able to pay it back. And yes, the TV corporate media is going to say, oh, the American people are confident in the economy. You don't see that reflected in the retail numbers or the credit numbers. Sears is about to close another 28 Kmart stores. They can't find that stable position. What they can't find is a customer base. And when you realize that Kmart has sort of traditionally been the bottom rung on the retail experience, when they can't find people who can go in there, that's a warning sign. Remember all those dollar stores? You'd go on in and the shelves are full of all this knickknacks and stuff that was, nothing more than $1, which was a lie. They went up to $10 and $20, but that was the lure. They've gone out of business. Now, China is still demanding that the U.S. immediately withdraw all sanctions on China linked to North Korea, saying that these sanctions will damage ties between China and the United States, because China doesn't feel they should be punished in an argument between the United States and North Korea. For that matter, the same applies to Russia as well. And as we mentioned earlier in the week, China is starting to pull their investment dollars out of the West and find new homes for it in the East. And the indicators are not good. You remember the story I think we did about 2 weeks ago? There's this woman, mother of two, has a job at Facebook and is still homeless, living out of her car. Can't afford housing prices in Silicon Valley, struggling with her student loan debt. Tell me how that represents a functioning, healthy economy. U.S. workers' wages and salaries are collapsing. People are being forced to accept less pay for the same work they used to do. Housing crisis in Silicon Valley. It's turning into this nightmare view of these huge, expensive mansions all boarded up. And on the lawn in front of them are all these homeless people. Chicago's National Activity Index actually went to 0 at one point. And then this little stunt where Mnuchin visited Fort Knox and stood there and said, I assume the gold is here. We've got nothing to worry about here. It's getting very, very scary out there. All right, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Talking about the economic news here. Now, because of Mnuchin's little stunt the other day, Mike Maloney is out there saying, this isn't a joke. There is a serious question. If the American people's gold is still in Fort Knox, because technically the gold in Fort Knox is collectively the property of the American people. Doesn't belong to the government. The government manages it for us, not well. But that's the way the thing works. It's our gold, and we have every right to know that it is still there. And there has not been a full audit in over half a century. Now, in the 1970s, after Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility, the Nixon shock, and even then there were questions about, was there really gold in Fort Knox enough to cover the U.S. government's continued borrowing from foreign governments? And they a bunch of people in, some TV cameras, they opened a single door and revealed a single wall of gold bricks. Nobody was allowed to touch, nobody was allowed to test. For all we know, they were tungsten cored even all the way back then. But it could have been just enough gold bars to fill up the space behind the door, and the rest of the vault was empty, and so were all the rest. We don't know, and we have a right to know. And Mike Maloney is out there saying this is getting really kind of scary, because we don't know, and we need to. And again, History Channel is rerunning America's Book of Secrets. And we covered a lot of this stuff in the segment, The Gold Conspiracy. Somebody actually pulled off a gold finger and robbed Fort Knox, we think. Now, remember when Germany demanded the repatriation of their gold some years back from the New York Federal Reserve and the Bank of France? Well, Germany has managed to bring back to Germany the last of the gold it had been storing at France's central bank. So France is out of that now. And it was a lot of 53,000 bars, each weighing 27 pounds, and it's now going to be kept in vaults beneath the bank's Frankfurt headquarters. And so now Germany has the flexibility. If something starts to go wrong and the paper currency is unreliable, now Germany has control of their own gold to convert into wealth for whatever purposes. And especially when you're getting ready to fight a war and nobody trusts paper currencies, being able to buy munitions for gold or silver is very important. And that's why there's still a lot of World War II wrecks on the floor of the Atlantic that are known to be carrying huge amounts of gold and silver. They've never been able to find them. Now, as far as the New York Federal Reserve, that's a different story entirely. They've been dragging their feet. They refuse to let Germany examine their gold bars. They've sent a few gold bars back, but not only are they clearly not the same bars that Germany deposited with them years ago, they're less pure. They've been adulterated. You know, when you buy gold, or for that matter silver, somewhere on there that's stamped .999, well, this gold is like .95, which is just a small amount, but it's another indicator. Somebody is shaving something somewhere for their own greed here. Now, the Plaza Hotel, which was once Donald Trump's crown jewel, is up for sale yet again. The current owners of the Plaza Hotel have hired a broker to sell the New York City landmark. And it's basically a sign that there's a worldwide scramble among investors, celebrities, and governments. It may be nearing an end. It's lost its luster. The constant media attacks on Donald Trump, his properties aren't the status symbol they used to be. So that's another indicator. Now, this is a bizarre story. This is Business Insider. And they've come on out with this story. Psychologically scarred millennials are killing countless industries from napkins to Applebee's. And this is an article that basically goes on out to say that those gosh darn millennials, you know, they're into cooking their own natural organic food at home. They don't feel like going to restaurants. And as a result, we're starting to see some of these restaurant chains get into serious financial trouble. And brands like Buffalo Wild Wings, Ruby Tuesday, and Applebee's are looking at these major sales slumps, and they're trying to find a scapegoat. Oh, those millennials, it's all their fault. They need to go on out and enjoy life a little bit more. What is not said in this article is that these millennials don't have the money to go out to restaurants. Restaurants have become very expensive, and the quality of what you get in a restaurant is often lower than what you get going to the supermarket. A lot of fillers, especially when you talk about these franchise brands. You don't really know what's in the food. But behind it all is the fact these kids don't have the money. They're struggling with student loan debt. Many of them are living with their parents. They're not able to go on out and have fun at a restaurant. The whole consumer economy is locking up because the money junkies have got all the money sucked up to the top of the pyramid, and they won't let go of a single penny of it to come back down to ordinary people. Okay, let's see. Let's take a phone call. Mike in Detroit. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing? Quick question for you.
Yes?
Have you been following what's going on in CERN coming up on September 23rd?
With what regard?
Well, have you seen the documentary, first of all, on CERN?
I've seen some documentaries on CERN.
They actually produced a movie.
Okay.
The question is, well, what they're planning on doing is, through years of study and research I've been doing on these guys, they plan on opening a rift or a portal on the 23rd of next month. And what they're doing is basically opening the gates of hell.
Well, that's a grand sweeping statement here. I mean, what specifically is it they're attempting to accomplish?
They're trying to find the God particle, and they're going in and out of dimensions as they've already done before.
Well, they've already claimed to have found they've already claimed to have found the God particle several times before, it always keeps coming up rather short. I look at CERN as really on the same level as the pyramids or the cathedrals of Europe or Stonehenge. It's the most amazing machine that can be built with the current technology in order to try and talk to God, which is really what finding the God particle is all about, because everyone got on board with this theory of the Big Bang and the supreme moment of creation by the deity, and then along comes Einstein and wrecks it with his theory of general relativity, which said that early universe had to be a massive black hole that could not escape its own gravity. And so what they've been looking for is some way to get around that contradiction. They refuse to go back and look at questioning that prime assumption of whether the universe really is expanding and really whether it all does go back to a single moment of creation. And instead, they're just trying to find ways to work around it. And it's a very strong parallel with the theory of epicycles. Back before the time of Galileo, the Church enforced the Aristotelian view of the solar system that the Earth was at the very center and did not move, and everything else moved around it. And as evidence began to mount that something was wrong with that theory, there was a study called epicycles, and these were these invisible structures in the sky that grabbed onto the planets and swung them back and forth as they circled around the Earth in their orbit. And the study of epicycles lasted 400 years. It is history's longest-running scientific goof. And finally, when Galileo came on out, the development of the telescope that proved that Mercury and Venus were, in fact, inferior planets pointing at the sun, it all started to come apart, and people began to understand, yes, the sun is the center of the solar system. So you need to question that prime assumption. And I, for one, I think that there are too many problems with that Big Bang theory. Now, the God particle is an attempt to get around the gravity well problem of the primordial egg by saying that when the Big Bang happened, what came on out of there was a particle that was completely massless. And because it had no mass, it had no gravity, and therefore it could just, fly away into the universe without any kind of hindrance. And then when it was far enough away from the singularity, it met this other particle, the Higgs boson. And that's what all of a sudden gave it the mass and properties like we know nuclear physics has today. And that's when the universe started to act the way it does right now. It is a very convoluted theory, and it all depends on, producing something with that CERN collider that looks like the Higgs boson. And they've claimed they've had it twice before, and it's been discredited. There is a problem, however, when you look at their methodology. Particle physicists like to describe what they're doing as taking two mechanical clocks, smashing them together, and then trying to figure out what the clocks look like by the gears and springs that come popping on out. But if you take those clocks and you hit them together hard enough, you're going to be breaking individual teeth off those gears that will come out as discrete components, even though prior to the nuclear collision, they were not separate components. And that is an issue that nobody has ever really satisfactorily explained. How do we know these new amazing particles coming out of these collisions are, in fact, parts of nature rather than being created by the experimental process itself?
Well, they said that it's taken them years and years to produce a teaspoon of antimatter, which they find so volatile. They have to contain it within magnets colder than space, just to keep it from touching the edges. Now, what they just did was they added a new circle to the original circle, which is spinning at the opposite directions. And
no, it's always done that. CERN's always had two rings with the particles going in opposite directions.
Well, they said that what the technology they just introduced to this circle.
Well, they just overhauled the system.
So advanced.
Yeah, they just overhauled the system. Okay, you know something? I'm going to let you go here because you're out here. Hang on. Yeah. You went opening the gates of hell and all the rest of that, and you don't really have your facts straight on this. So, Mike, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Jack in Georgia. Aloha, Jack. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, a couple of things about the reasons for the Afghanistan war. As you always say correctly, it's a number of reasons, not one only. We know about the extraction of natural resources and the opium source.
Yes.
Two more very important reasons are the destabilization of Central Asia.
Yes.
And the last one is, I think the most important is to disrupt the new Silk Road, what they call the otherwise Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI.
Yeah, so, I believe that does actually have to transit Afghanistan.
That the Chinese are already in Afghanistan, but they're doing good things there. They do not bomb and kill.
Yes.
They're helping, they're helping the Afghans connect to the new Silk Road. That's going to bring a lot of raise the standard of living of Afghanistan. So that's one. The second, I read that the North Korea tensions seem to be easing up a little bit.
Yeah.
The last one question: are there any nuclear weapons in South Korea?
Yeah, lots of them. They all belong to the United States, and Moon Jae-in would like the United States to take them home.
Okay. The South Koreans themselves do not have any control of it. They don't have any weapons of their own.
No nuclear weapons of their own, no. Okay?
All right. Thank you, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Back with another phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And by the way, just to keep things in perspective, this is the third year when somebody's tried to run this CERN will destroy the universe on September 23rd. It's sort of a recurring pattern. All right, we're going to go back to the phones. Tom in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Michael, good afternoon. Speaking of destroying the universe, the world, I think that's what George Soros is trying to do with his insanity that criminal is doing. I was wondering, Michael, I think he should be put under the RICO Act because I believe he's an enemy of the state of the United States. He's paying these Democrat protesters thousands of dollars, and you can see what's going on with Black Lives Matter and tearing down our statues of our country. I believe Soros is a big financer of this.
Yes.
And I think the RICO Act, if you look at what he's doing, I believe Donald Trump could actually have him arrested because what he's doing against this country is disgraceful. And, you know, Michael, you're talking about these statues. What about Sheila Jackson Lee? What are they going to just call her Sheila now in the house?
Yeah, well, it's like I said, Bruce Lee. They're going to say, he was a Confederate supporter. I don't think so. The interesting thing about Soros is he's not just committing crimes against the United States, he's committing them against Europe. He's playing God with the entire world. And unfortunately, he's got so much money, and he's tied in with so many intelligence agencies that he can get away with it. He's basically recruited people from within virtually every government to be part of his New World Order, one world government agenda. It's not really a policy so much as it's a religious ideology. And in a lot of ways, these people are just as crazy as the Scientologists. They're just as fanatical. They're just as totally unconcerned with the harm they bring to others in pursuit of their little fantasy. And that really does make them very, very dangerous.
Yeah, Michael, George Soros is not complaining about the state of Israel having a wall around it, but he's sure complaining about Trump wanting to build a southern border wall. But when it comes to Israel, I notice Soros is all hands off against that government. It seems like he don't have nothing bad to say about Israel, but every other government, he's just trying to take them down. And we know who this guy Soros is. I mean, people are waking up, and that's a great thing. But what's going on with the Black Lives Matter and the real hatred in this country, I believe, like I say this, Michael, it's not coming from the author right. It's definitely coming from the author left. They're the real hateful ones. And if you look at the FBI crime statistics, the crime on minorities against majority people in this country, it'd be frightening to most of the people in the majority. If you look at the crime rates,
yes,
it's unbelievable. I'm talking rape, murder, robberies, and every other thing you can think of. And like I said, I talked to you a couple days back. If you look at how many gang members alone illegally in this country are in L.A., it would be frightening to most American people if they ran it for, say, a good 2 to 3 days. If they actually knew how many gangs alone are here illegally.
Yeah, especially that MS-13. Those people are very, very dangerous. And like I said, if Claire and I are able to get the money together to get back to the mainland, even though we have fond memories of when we lived in California, Claire's from San Francisco and everything, we would not live there. The place has just gone nuts. We'd want to find someplace out in the Midwest, somewhere between Indiana and New England, because we got family back there. But again,
Western
looking
Arkansas
at all,
is very cheap, Michael. Western Arkansas.
It's all beautiful country. It's all very beautiful country. But frankly, looking at what's going on in the streets of America, and especially with the United Nations coming on out and saying that we may be on the verge of major civil unrest in this country, Claire and I are saying maybe we'll just hang out here in Hawaii a little tiny bit longer. And so we're going to seriously start looking for a somewhat newer car than what we've got now, because this Honda's been amazing. Been absolutely amazing, but it is 18 years old.
Well, Michael, when the hurricane hits Texas the next day or so, we'll see what happens over there. It should be very weird situation what's going to happen in Texas after the Category 3 into Texas. You'll have people like they in New Orleans went to Houston. Now the ones in Houston and stuff might go back to New Orleans. So who knows what's going to happen with that.
Well, I just I hope everybody's okay. They're taken care of. And again, remembering the disaster of Hurricane Katrina, let us hope that the relevant government agencies are quicker to respond to deal with what's about to happen. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And let's see. I think we did finish up with Tom in Florida. So the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443 if you want to call on in here. Getting on back to the economic news, there is a new subprime crisis, and it has to do with a subprime lender, Provident Financial. And apparently, having learned nothing from the subprime mortgage disaster, Provident Financial has been putting out subprime loans for cars and various other things. And right now, its loan repayment rates have fallen from 90% to only 57% over the last year, leading to profit warnings, the departure of its chief executive, and a collapse in its share price. Now, those shares are obviously part of the portfolio of a lot of Americans. And they're caught with this downward plunge. None of this stuff happens in a vacuum, especially with publicly traded companies. Now, as you know, Donald Trump is once again back to screaming about his border wall, threatening to close down the government unless he gets his border wall. And I'm starting to think almost it's a distraction, because you really don't need a wall on the border. All you need to do is enforce the existing Title VIII laws in this country. Anybody caught housing, employing, transporting, feeding illegal immigrants is guilty of a crime. Stop giving out free stuff to illegals. Stop registering them to vote. Just enforce the existing laws. It can be done. Eisenhower did it. He didn't need a wall. He only had 10% of the manpower that today's Immigration and Customs Enforcement has. And he just shut it right down. It can be done. But as that caller was indicating, Soros is already, in a lather. You can't have a wall and there's no borders. And the caller is also right. It's a double standard. It's okay for Israel to have walls, but nobody else. Meanwhile, to show what's really happening in the long run with all of this unrestrained immigration here, over in Rome, their migrants are now rioting, and apparently there has been some damage to some of these ancient classical monuments and ruins, and apparently the Rome police had to get on out there with the water cannons to get them to leave, and that actually made the U.S. corporate news. They were out there showing the big van with the water cannon just spraying these people, trying to get them to break up and go away. The European Union has just weeks to relocate 130,000 migrants as bloc to fail on another pledge. Now, what this is obviously the migrants come in to European Union member nations that are on the edge of the Mediterranean, or they're on the border with the non-EU part of the world. And Brussels has been promising they will relocate the huge population of migrants in these border countries, especially Italy, to other parts in the EU. And they haven't been doing it. They haven't been doing it. And now, again, looking at the riots going on in Rome, Italy is just in serious, serious trouble. And on top of all of that, Libya's prime minister is warning that a lot of these migrants heading for Europe are actually jihadists. And they are posing as migrants And who knows what they're going to do when they get into Europe. And we're already starting to see all these terror attacks all over the place. And you have to sit back and just marvel at how the people who want the one world government, the New World Order, are completely oblivious to the harm that's being caused. Indeed, they're out there trying to say that if you're not okay with multiple rapes and all this other stuff, that there's something wrong with you. You're a racist. If you object to migrants raping your daughter, you must be a racist. Now, I'm joking, but at some point, we're actually going to hear that. We're going to hear that from some of these people. And believe it or not, scientists are working on a plan to ease some of the tension from the migration. And no, it doesn't involve shutting the borders and sending them back. There's actually a plan out there to dose the incoming migrants with oxytocin. This is the hormone produced by babies that make adults automatically love them. And so they're going to basically create these love refugees. They're going to dose them with this hormone, and we just can't help but fall in love with them. Now they're down to drugging us to go along with the New World Order. Boy, right out of Brave New World, huh? All right, let's grab some phone calls here. Philip in Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
that story you just mentioned about that hormone that they're going to be spraying is about as nutty as the sports reporter at ESPN that they relieved of duty because his name was Lee.
Yeah, and he's Asian American, where Lee is like this incredibly common name. It really is. It's just gone so totally bonkers out there.
Well, speaking of the refugee problem, it seems like somebody has a case to file a class action suit in the World Court for the EU for opening the floodgates for this problem, which leads me to the question I had about, I think it was you that reported the other day about a lawfare in the favorable sense, not the negative sense that we've seen the government's wage against us, the people, like the Bundys and the Finnegan and that situation up there. Did you report the other day that somebody is suing the NSA and these other intelligence agencies for releasing their data?
I think I remember hearing something about that. The last lawsuit we were talking about was this lawyer in San Diego who was suing the corporate TV news networks in a class action on behalf of all of us deplorables who have been defamed by the corporate media. And yes, it's absolutely a solid case. And so,
okay, that's what that was.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, that's along the lines of, I guess you'd say also the case that you reported on a couple of days ago about the fellow suing the RNC because they haven't come through with their promise to repeal Obamacare, and the people filing the class action suit against the DNC for Sanders getting ripped off. And yeah, that's these are the favorable cases of lawfare that we need to be able to engage in and avoid all the negative ones that the alphabet agencies are using against us to tie us up, like we saw over there, with the Bundy situation. But it's sad to hear that you report that, they're going to be still coming after them from another angle, I guess, and they're still going to have to be going through a lot of turmoil and oppression. It's just sick.
Yeah, we're definitely there, and again, it is this incredible amount of evil, and yet if you even mention the Uranium One deal and its links to this wildlife refuge area and that whole situation, and they're saying, oh, you're a conspiracy theory wacko, you're wearing a tinfoil hat, there's nothing there but Trump and Russia are swapping wet kisses.
Well, I tell you, these activist judges, they need to be tarred and feathered.
Yeah, sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, yeah. Thanks for jogging my memory about that. The suit is over there in San Francisco against the TV stations that are misrepresenting and painting with a broad brush all of the white people basically as racists.
Yeah, that's basically it, and it's actually San Diego, and this lawyer is absolutely correct. The corporate media is out there saying that we're all racist if we vote Republican, we're racist if we voted for Donald Trump, and there is no basis for that whatsoever. And yes, we all have grounds to sue these TV network news outlets for defamation, because yeah.
Go ahead. Well, I mean, what they're doing is really dangerous. In a legal sense, it's reckless endangerment and gross negligence in fanning up these racial tension that could lead, to a powder keg that would explode.
It legally counts as incitement. These TV news networks are guilty of incitement to violence.
There you go. All right. Well, we would bid him well in his effort to bring these people, make them accountable for their reckless behavior, their incitement.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, it's a her. Thank you very much for the phone call.
Okay.
We're going to switch over to Rick in Arizona. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Rick, are you there?
Yep.
Okay, you're on the air. What's on your mind today?
The wall.
Okay.
The wall is going to be built to stop the cheap health care and dental care you can get in Mexico. It's going to stop you from going down there and getting antibiotics or painkillers. It's going to stop what's going on in the Rio Grande Valley over the years is there's no abortion clinics. They've all been scared off through, okay, you could call it terrorist threats, but they threatened to kill the doctors in those abortion clinics over the years. So the whole Rio Grande Valley down there is totally abortion-free. So this is really to keep us in. It's not going to do anything for immigration. I mean, that whole, if I predict that if there's going to be a wall built, it'll be built like from the Gulf Coast on up past McAllen, maybe 100 miles. But it's to keep people from crossing the border and accessing economical health care.
Well, first of all, I mean, the wall is supposed to block illegal crossing of the border. It's not supposed to impede legal crossing of the border. Second, I believe that it's already been made illegal to purchase drugs in Canada. I don't know what the status is regarding Mexico, but you're absolutely right. Their dental care down there is first rate and very inexpensive. I do know a lot of people who live in the American Southwest who will make that 5-hour drive down across the border because there they can get dental work done that they couldn't even dream of affording here in the United States of America. But you're right. At some point, they'll lock that off. They'd rather have people dying in the streets of America than let them have health care at a reasonable price.
Yeah. So I don't think it has anything to do with immigration. Because if you want to stop immigration, you can just sanction the employers. Simple as that.
I agree with that. I agree with you on that one. They don't really need a wall. I like to joke that it's cheaper to put crocodiles in the Rio Grande, but you just need to enforce the laws that already exist. And that means going after these mayors and governors of sanctuary cities and sanctuary states and just say, look, this is the United States of America. We have laws here under Title VIII, and if you do not enforce them, you are going to go to jail. And I'm rather surprised that Donald Trump is not taking a heavier hand on that regard and instead just focusing his whole attitude on the wall. And yes, I understand he comes out of real estate development and building buildings, and the Trump wall will be his masterpiece and everything. But we don't really need it. Eisenhower proved that. What we need is to go back to being a nation where we are taking care of our own first and foremost. It seems like we've lost that America first, that make America great. We're already back to mucking about with other people's countries. I do not like it. Let's go back to the phones here. Laura in Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Please indulge me a little bit. I checked on a map, and Afghanistan closes up quite nicely on its western border to Iran.
Yes.
Now, what upsets me is that we seem hell-bent on getting rid of Iran for Israel.
Yes.
And it occurred to me that with Syria and Iraq also in play, with plenty of troops, we're going to get them in a pincher. And the Middle East will be a war against, caught in a pincher movement between Afghanistan and, to its west, Iran and Iraq for the greater Israel. I can't help but wonder if that isn't planned.
Well, we know Israel wants Iran smashed up. The real danger is, though, if they explode the entire Middle East into a regional war, that is going to absolutely disrupt the flow of oil coming out of there. And despite, or because of the accident with the Deepwater Horizon, the U.S. can't cover the shortfall. There will be a serious petroleum shortage. And probably one of the reasons they want to go into Venezuela now is to get control of that oil as well. But most of the oil is still coming out of those wells in the Middle East, and if those lines of communication through the Gulf get cut off by open warfare, then yeah, there's going to be a serious economic disruption.
Yeah, it's economic interruption for us. But of course, everything will go into the war effort, and to hell with the United States. I'm very disappointed in Mr. Trump, extremely.
I am too.
And I find it difficult to believe that this isn't pre-planned to get rid of Iran. Afghanistan may have all those wonderful little minerals, but they all seem.
I'm sorry to cut you off. We're coming up on a commercial break. I mean, all the way back in 2005, General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on the U.S. government's plan to conquer all the resource-rich areas in the Middle East in order to shackle them to the U.S. dollar. And Iran was the last one on the list, supposedly conquered in 2008. Obviously, we're a little off the timeline here. But yeah, it's been that plan all along to bring Iran to heel, to shackle them to a private central bank, and to basically reduce them as a political opponent for Israel in the region. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Thank you for the phone call, Laura. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, getting on back to the immigration issue here. Here in the United States of America, the backlog in the deportations in the court, in the immigration court, is 610,000. They're just piling up and piling up and piling up, and of course the open borders people are trying to delay and slow it down. It really is a fight for the.
Some are maxed out all their credit cards. Some are working 2 jobs and
what
living
happened?
in cars.
Are we?
Man, my computer's all goofy, man. Sorry, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
We're back though. You can go ahead.
Who am I talking to?
Oh, this is Mike in the control room.
Oh, okay. Do we have a caller on the line, or this
No,
was
no.
just okay? All right. So here we are. Well, that was a little weird there. All right. So we're talking about the backlog in the immigration court, and of course the New World Order, globalists, open border people. They're trying to find any way they can slow the process down. It literally is a war for this land, between those who have lived here for generation upon generation, those of us who are here legally, and this idea that anybody on planet Earth should be able to just walk across the border, come on in here, and start demanding things, start raping children, selling drugs. It's a very destructive process we're in the middle of, and the people who are behind it don't care. They really are religious fanatics. It doesn't matter how much suffering it causes. In the long run, we will be making a better world. If you ever watch that Lee Remini show on Scientology, that's how they get it all to work. That's how they get those Scientologists to do the very scummy things that they do, because they're absolutely convinced that anything evil they do now is worth it, because in the long run, they're making the earth and the human race much, much better. And the ends justify the means. And we're seeing exactly the same thing now with these fanatics for the open borders. You have to really scratch your head about what's going on out here. The Rockland Academy School Board is facing some tough questions from parents when it came on out that one of their instructors was having discussions about transgenderism in a kindergarten class. And the parents are very angry, and I do not blame them. First of all, kids in kindergarten have no idea what you're talking about. They're not being educated. They're being indoctrinated to accept this new idea of gender fluidity. And I can imagine the parents are very angry about that. Most parents want to feel that they are in charge of their children's education in certain very personal matters, sex being one of them. Now, we were sent this video about what's happening with our children. And it's from Germany, and it's in German, and it's subtitled. But it's showing film of children as they were 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, when I was a kid. And they were just kids. Contrasting with all of these videos of these toddlers in tiaras, literally children cheerleading teams that are twerking on out there. And it really is rather shocking when you understand something horrible is happening to our children. And whether it's deliberate policy or an artifact of all these chemicals that we're being saturated with, but they're not being allowed to be children anymore. Their youth and their innocence are being stolen from them in the rush to get them up on stage or turn them into perfect consumers. And it's always about more drugs and more water. Apparently, BBC is launching a new program. I'll tell you what, we're going to do this after the station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And believe it or not, government's media seem to think that drugging us all is the solution to the problems. We were talking about these scientists who want to spray refugees with the hormone that babies put out to make adults love them. And now the BBC is out there saying it's time to put lithium in the drinking water to calm us all down. Now, that's actually part of the reason they fluoridate water as well. It's a mild tranquilizer. Fluoride in the water has no effect on tooth decay. It just doesn't. Topically applied, yes, it does. Drinking it, no. But it is a mild tranquilizer. They're keeping you doped up so you don't get angry. And apparently the fluoride isn't cutting it anymore because people are getting angry. So now they want to put lithium in the drinking water. Lithium is some serious medication they give to people to keep them calm in the mental homes. And that seems to be what they're thinking out there. If at first you don't succeed, drug them. And again, this goes back to Brave New World. You're ordered to take your drugs. The government deliberately addicts you to drugs like Soma. Now, over at the State Department, their science envoy, Daniel Kamen, has resigned. He's a holdover from the Obama era. He's an absolute human-caused global warming supporter. And he left with this weird message which seems to say that he thinks Trump ought to be impeached for not going along with human-caused global warming. You know what it looks like to me? The whole country has become a nation of whiners. The United States, coming out of World War II, coming into the period where I was a child, was a nation of builders and doers. And over time, as the Democrats have come on in and played the politics of victimhood, we've become a nation of whiners, that if we just sit there and whine loud enough, somebody will give us what we want. We won't have to do anything other than whine for it. We've become a nation of professional whiners. I don't like that statue. All right, we'll knock it down. I don't like what those people are wearing. All right, we'll have a dress code. And on and on and on. But you can't run a nation on a population of whiners. Somebody somewhere has to be doing the work. Somebody somewhere has to be growing the food. Whiners are basically parasites. And you can have enough parasites that the host dies. Just something to keep in mind as you see all these people in the streets screaming about tearing down this statue of Rocky and Bullwinkle or whatever. Which, by the way, I was rather sad to see has actually been torn down there on Sunset. Not for political reasons. It was just getting too old and ratty. Too much earthquake damage here. Now, getting on back to Google and the growing in-your-face degree of censorship, Google is now banning scientists and statisticians with their automated system of blocking fake news. And, of course, the big stink is over statistics professor Salil Mehta, who all of a sudden woke up to find he'd been completely banned by Google. All of his Google-linked accounts erased and inaccessible. And it came as a complete shock because this Columbia University adjunct professor is not political. He teaches math. He uses his Google accounts to help teach math. That's it. But something that was in there flagged him as fake news, and Google banned him. Now, Google finally backed down and reinstated him, and still won't explain how it was he got banned in the first place. But it looks like their algorithm is casting way too wide a net. And maybe instead of focusing on trying to find fake news or unapproved news or unofficial news or news that somebody somewhere doesn't want to have to look at because they'll cry, and again, if they don't want to look at the news, turn the computer off. Just stop trying to decide for everybody else what we should all be seeing, because that's how wars start. But Google needs to pay a lot more attention to their quality of product. Because apparently there's a new banking Trojan that is just getting right past Google Play's malware defenses. There was this game called Bubble Shooter Wildlife and an app named Earn Real Money gift cards in the Google Play Store were actually designed to drop banking malware named BankBot. And the malware only becomes active when the actors decide to drop the real Trojan on the victim's device and therefore bypass Google's internal malware scanner named Bouncer. So Google is spending way too much time making sure that we're all being politically correct and not enough time making sure that our systems are working. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the show, somebody finally won that huge Powerball jackpot, in addition to the big one of $750 million, I think it was. There were several $1 million, a $2 million, and a $4 million winner as well. And believe me, when that Powerball got that high, I would have loved to buy a ticket, but you're not allowed to buy them here in Hawaii. But there's another story here. Apparently, this guy named Eddie Tipton, 54, and he's the former information technology manager for the Multi-State Lottery Association out of central Iowa. And this company provides number-picking computers for lotteries in 33 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And apparently he figured out a way to rig these counting machines to make himself some fast money. And he basically cheated 4 states, including Wisconsin, out of $2.2 million in several lottery games over 6 years. He's been sentenced to 25 years in prison in Iowa. I remember not too long ago there was this YouTube video showing the numbers coming up on this big lottery game, and it was one of the typical machines you see is a big clear glass bubble, and there's these ping pong balls in there riding around on air, and they get fed into the chute. And the announcer called out the numbers, got 2 of them in the wrong place, and made it very obvious somehow it was being rigged. And that's another story. And all joking aside, it's why I don't get involved in these kinds of games. There's always going to be somebody who's going to be cheating the system. Cheating is not just confined to the Wall Street bankers. The other part of it, of course, is years ago when I was a working magician, and I did spend a summer on a Mississippi riverboat, and I was playing at being a riverboat gambler. That was the theme of the magic show. But along the way, of course, I was playing cards with the guests. That was part of my job. And I was demonstrating how easy it is to cheat at cards. And I'm not talking about shave decks or any of the stuff that you buy for that purpose. But one of the really good books on card manipulation I have is not a book for magicians. It is a book for card sharks. It's actually a book on how to cheat at card games, how to deal seconds, how to deal bottoms, and just all that kind of stuff. And because of the theme, I got really good at it. And so that's another reason why I don't actually go to Las Vegas and I don't actually gamble. I know how easy it is to cheat. I'll tell you, though, if they ever changed blackjack from 21 to 23, I would own that strip. Now then, apparently there's been yet another hacking attack. This is from governmentslaves.com. Over $6 million in Social Security benefits stolen from bank accounts. It's getting out of control out there. Cybercrime is clearly a present danger to our society, and nobody seems to do anything about it. The NSA isn't doing anything about it. The FBI says if you get infected by ransomware, pay the ransom. Not a thing they can do. We think we're going to go to cyber war against the rest of the world, and we can't handle the cyber criminals on our own soil? The Germans are right. The military might of the United States, it's a facade, it's a bubble. There's nothing really behind it anymore. A little bit of good news. We've often talked about Google and its new up-and-coming competitors such as Yandex. And as it turns out, Yandex is gaining ground against Google, especially in Russia, which is where it's from. And so Google is losing its market to Yandex, which I think is a good thing when they're going to presume to decide for us what we want to see, because that's not what we use a search engine for. And again, getting on back to chemicals in food. Longtime listeners have heard me rant and rail about chemicals added to food in the United States that actually make you gain weight, make you want to eat more. And that a big part of my being able to lose 100 pounds over the last 2 years was avoiding those chemicals like monosodium glutamate, high fructose corn syrup, various other chemicals, hormone-treated meat, and so forth and so on. And yet, there's still more out there. We don't know them all. And there's a good example here because there's a story that came out of Natural News. And it has to do with a chemical that's added to breakfast cereals, butyl hydroxytoluene. And it's an additive used to prolong shelf life, to reduce spoilage, to increase profits, and as it turns out, according to a study conducted by researchers at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, it's an endocrine disruptor. And basically it causes you to gain weight. The chemical disrupts normal hormone production, and it can produce unnatural changes in children. And they just put these chemicals in there because it maximizes profits, and nobody's keeping watch on any of this stuff. And they should be. But they aren't, because right now the United States has declined into fascism, where anything that makes money is automatically deemed good, and anything that doesn't make money, well, that's bad. And if you can make money selling chemicals to children that are going to change their biology, sure, it's okay. If they get into trouble later on, well, they'll just spend more money dealing with the doctors, hospitals, prescription medication. And again, getting on back to that video about what's happened to children. In the middle of it are some children who are obviously politically correct because they're somewhere on that gender spectrum. But if you look at this chemical that they've just found is an endocrine disruptor, that's one of the symptoms it produces. Your body is not getting a clear signal from your own glands as to whether you're male or female. And so now we have to go back and look at how much of this transgenderism or gender confusion or gender identity problems are chemically induced by these food additives. It's amazing. It's like this issue with the prescription antidepressants. And they're monster sellers, making huge amounts of money. And something like a quarter of the American people are on these. And as they have come onto the market, we have seen this amazing, or tragic, if you will, decline in ethics, morality. We've seen people just acting on impulse, acts of violence, suicide, self-harm, mass shootings, domestic violence, road rage. In the name of pharmaceutical corporation profits, have we allowed our population to be drugged to the edge of mental illness? It's amazing here. All right, well, let's see. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and got time to call on in here. Meanwhile, apparently Soros is funding a website that is actually openly talking about the assassination of Donald Trump as a fundraising tool for Senator Chapel Nadal. I'm very alarmed at all of this open talk about assassination. It's like they're trying to get us used to the idea that it's going to happen sooner or later, and so when it does happen, don't be upset. I don't know about you, but as disappointed as I am in Donald Trump, if he gets assassinated, I think I'm going to be very, 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 very upset about it. I'm not used to the idea. I never will be. It's not how civilized people in civilized nations behave. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Sherry in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I heard two things recently that really bothered me. Two mental health related reports. One's about Google, and this was on the news this morning on the NBC News at noon. And it was Google has a website where a person can fill out a form to determine if, let's say, they qualify for help for a possible mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
And this form is going to be signed by the person with their mental status and all reported to Google and everything else. And then I hear, I guess it was yesterday, the guy that there was a manhunt for the guy who killed the woman during the violent clash.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Now, they can't question him because they shot him, of course. So, but they're going to look at his problem from a mental illness standpoint, not drugs, but mental illness standpoint, which means they will probably want to be putting people on drugs. So when I put these two things together, Google's report where we want to help you, fill out your information if you think you have a mental illness and let us know what's going on with you so we can help you. Now you put these two things together and you have the possibility, and I don't know if they've tried this before, to force drugs on people if there's a law passed to do so.
Well, I mean, they're already forcing us to get vaccinations, and yeah, it's a very short leap from there to forcing us to take mind-altering drugs there. First of all, I would never fill out such a personal questionnaire on Google or anyplace else online. It's none of their business. Second of all, you need to understand there was an article that came on out where one of the so-called health websites, and I forget which one it was, were running a survey as to whether you were depressed and needed to seek antidepressants, and it came on out that this website had accepted a huge payment to put this survey on the website, and no matter how you answered on the survey, it would always come up and say, yes, you are clinically depressed, you need to see your practitioner. It was just a tool to sell more of these medications. But again, with this legal precedent of forcing vaccinations on us, yeah, it does seem like it's only a matter of time before we're going to be forced to take psychiatric medications. And the big question out there is, looking at how some people react to antidepressants, is in fact much of the so-called mental illness that we're looking at really being cured by the medications or caused by it? Because going back to my one incident, at the time that my doctor said, here, try this, I wasn't having any kind of mental illness issues. I was a little depressed because my marriage was breaking up, and that was it. And then she puts me on these medications, and I have this horrible adverse reaction that just scared the heck out of me. And we know these are very dangerous medications. But they make money, and they're completely out of control. And yes, at some point when the pharmaceutical industry doesn't feel they're making enough money selling medications to perfectly healthy people, they will make it mandatory, just like the vaccines.
Yeah, I think they're probably hurting too, because there's supplements are so effective and people are doing so well on the supplements that don't have the adverse effects.
Yes.
That they're probably hurting. And then you have this form where the person's actually signing their name. Now, I think, like you say, we have very smart listeners, and we know we can see this right away, that you're not going to sign your name on something that says you might be, mentally ill.
Yeah, absolutely. Sherry, stay on the line. Sherry, stay on the line. I'm going to put you on hold. Take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Sherry in Texas, and we're talking about where we are losing control over what goes in our bodies. We're being told that we're not allowed to know what's in the food we buy at the supermarket. We know that there are chemicals in that food that work against our best health interests, that stimulate our appetite, make us eat more so the food companies can make more money off of us. Chemicals that are apparently unintentionally disrupting the endocrine system, which basically controls your biology. And you have to wonder how many of the adverse things like gender confusion are in fact being caused by these chemicals, which are allowed to be in the food because, hey, it makes money.
Yeah, and we're going to continue to learn about this, but, it just shows you what you put on paper has legal ramifications. It's always been that way. And you're giving someone permission to help you. That sets a legal precedent. And, you have given them the permission to dispense drugs to you now, especially if there's a law that says that they can, your name's going to be on it, We can express our grievances over the phone like we're doing now, and that's safe because this is okay, But when you put something on a piece of paper, I hope most people, I think our audience knows, you're giving them permission, and if there's a law passed, they're all going to have that piece of paper that says it's okay for you to come in and intervene if you think I might be the cause of something that happened in my neighborhood or whatever it is. You never know.
Well, like I said, I would never fill out something like that online anyway. And at this day and age, obviously there is no such thing as privacy on the internet. If there's a way to make a fast buck off of your data, off of your picture, off of the camcorder on your laptop, there's going to be somebody out there doing it. And we know the government itself is one of the biggest cyber criminals out there. We know that from the Seattle APEC, where government agents were breaking into conference attendees' computers and stealing business secrets. Has nothing to do with law enforcement or counterterrorism. Had everything to do with making money for Bill Clinton's cronies.
Yeah, and I was talking to a friend of mine that was, staunchly against Trump today, and boy, it's a different story now. It's just a different story. So we're moving forward slowly but surely.
Okay.
That covers it.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call, Sherry.
Thank you.
We're going to let you go. And before we take the next phone call, there is a new malware out there, and you need to be aware of it. In fact, I think Claire just dodged it in the other room. There is a virus, cross-platform virus, spreading through Facebook Messenger. And basically, you get a message sent to you with a video link. And if you click on it, you will get this cross-platform virus downloaded to your machine here. This has been spotted by the people at Kaspersky Labs. And once again, we have to turn to Russia for protection of our computer systems. But it really is a shame, because I remember when the computers first started up and I had my VIC-20 and Amiga and everything, and we could all look forward and see that amazing potential. And now all of a sudden we're looking around and realizing that the computers and the internet have been turned into a giant jungle full of predators, and we're the prey animals. And the government doesn't want to do anything about it. Corporations don't want to do anything about it except to sell us more computer security software, which very often actually makes your system more vulnerable. And behind it all, we've allowed the technology to become too decadent to manage. That's a big part of the problem as well. Okay, now then, let's see. We don't have enough time before the commercial for the next phone call. So, interesting little article that we got out of NASA. Martian snowstorms could pose potential danger to future explorers. And they're talking about how, oh my goodness, there does appear to be snow on Mars, which is not news to anybody because we found that back on Viking in 1976. And Mars is a fascinating place here. But I've noticed a tendency for NASA to make discoveries that have already been made and act like it's the first time. We'll be back with more phone calls after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go back to the phones here, I look at this story, and I think it underscores perfectly what I said about our technology becoming so decadent. We can't manage it anymore because apparently Samsung just sent out a firmware update for their smart TV systems that has essentially bricked them. This is a botch up. It's so bad, there's no way to fix it in the home. People are going to have to send or bring their televisions back to their dealership to get them fixed, to get them restarted. Have you not heard of like testing things before you put them out for distribution? Remember a while back we were getting all these botched patches from Microsoft that were causing all kinds of problems? All these companies are cutting their quality assurance staff to save money, to get huge bonuses for the executives. And everybody else is left with all this poor quality crud. And apparently this botch up, there was an update released on August the 8th, and it made some of the newer smart sets, thank goodness ours is old, the 50-inch Ultra HD and the 49-inch 4K displays inoperable. Absolutely inoperable. All right, let's take some phone calls. Rob in Illinois, thank you for being patient and waiting all this time. What's on your mind?
No, it's not a problem, Mike. I appreciate the information you're providing us. That is a botch up with Samsung, you know. All these devices, they're going to be the end of us. You know, all these devices, every piece of technology, your phone, your Amazon, your Siri, your smart meters, you know, for your electric, and then they do one for water now. They're all collecting our information. Your Facebook, your Google, your Twitter, they're just data mining everything we do. Even Google admits their Android phone is recording the things that you're doing and saying. They just reported that your smart meters are, because they're picking up all these signals, they're actually recording your data like that's being transferred in your home. So if you're on your website, they're transferring that data to your smart meter and they're transferring that out. So they're collecting data every which way but loose.
Well, my concern, they're collecting so much data, they're never going to be able to make heads or tails of any of it. My concern here is that we're being made to be dependent on these devices, and then they're unreliable. And we've heard all these horror stories of people who have these smartphones or tablets or whatever, and they're integral to their business. And all of a sudden they'll fail. There'll be a botched software update, and all of a sudden they're absolutely shut down. And because of the indemnification of the computer industry from any civil liabilities from harm caused by their products, they just sit there and they shrug their shoulders. And meanwhile, small businesses that have become dependent on their computerized systems are being driven out of business. I mean, I have still never been able to install my legitimate license of 3D Studio Max on this Windows 7 machine. It simply refuses to do that. If I were still in the business of computer animation, I would have gone out of business a long time ago. And there isn't anything I can do to sue either the company that makes 3D Studio Max or Microsoft or whatever about it. They just point fingers at each other and laugh about it. It's all lots of fun for them.
Well, backing up a step or two there, it's up to us to start weaning ourselves off, because it's personal accountability to start weaning ourselves off of these devices and stop relying on them so much. Yes, they're great for all this stuff, to realize what is being used against us. You know, what they're collecting, the lady talking about the survey online, asking all these personal questions. It's something they also do at the at your doctor's office now. You know, do you wear camouflage pants? Do you own a gun? You know, do you ever feel depressed? That type of stuff. They're collecting all of this to be used against us, which is very unfortunate. Going back another couple steps here, what is it? The Russian company,
Kaspersky.
What did that have to do? Yeah, what did that have to do with the messenger virus?
Well, basically, they're just warning that this is a cross-platform hacking malware attack where you're going to get what appears to be a message from somebody that you know with a video link under it, and if you click on that link, it downloads the payload.
Right. It's the same old trick. They spoof somebody that you know, and then you click on it thinking you know the person. They do it through email and you name it. It's the same old trick, but it's nice that Kaspersky is putting on a notice for that. But people, again, weaning ourselves off this. You know, collectively, we all need to start getting away from Facebook, Twitter, Google, because of all the things that they're doing out there. That's, you know, all their PC behavior. They're more inciting all this hate with racism and prejudice and white people. You know, we need to start pulling back, and all the censorship on top of it all. We really need to get away from them because we've given them too much power. And we know they're all connected to the CIA. The CIA funded. Information's going to them. It's going to Israel. It's just ridiculous.
Well, it is, but again, they're collecting so much data, I seriously doubt they can make much sense of it. I'm sure that they're tracking individual people, but just sweeping up all the data, I think in the long run, probably most of it's being just, you know, sent to the bit bucket, and it's a demonstration of capability only. Obviously, my age, I mean, I've spent most of my life with computers, and they used to be fun. Now I have a love-hate relationship with them. And obviously, I need to use it for the radio show here and for maintaining the website and supporting Claire's choir. But outside of that, as soon as that's all done, I shut it all down. And I'm doing more and more things in my life that don't involve computers, you know, stuff with music, and that kind of thing. And I'm walking away from it. I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook or Twitter or any of that stuff anymore.
Well, those of us that got a brain in our head learned a while ago that social media is exactly the opposite. It's antisocial. I got a question. Did you report on Howard Dean making the statement, if you vote Republican, you're racist, coming up for the next elections? Yeah, I did yesterday on that one, and it's absurd, and he's drawn a huge amount of criticism because of that, as well he should. Well, he's an absurd character. He makes a lot of wild comments as I was looking through the search feed. Yes. Did you make mention of the Barcelona chief rabbi urges Jews to move to Israel as Europe has been lost? Did you report on that one? No, I didn't, but Israel always wants the Jews everywhere to come to Israel, and they failed in their attempt to do it in Iran. They may succeed in Europe because the European Jews are being very, very nervous about all the Muslims pouring on in. Right. I was going to talk, I know I should make this more shorter here, but last thing I want to say, because you were talking about the vaccines and whatnot, and it's absurd. That's where the drugging begins, and you know how crazy the vaccines got before you're 18 years old. It's up to, what, 70-some, sorry, the neighbor's kids. 70-some vaccines kids get before they're even 18 years old. And immediately when a child is born, they're giving them an HPV shot, like within hours of their birth, you know? And that's a sexually transmitted disease that they're trying to prevent. But, you know, this is ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
Did you ever hear the John Rappaport report that he did on Alex Jones, where he talks about 1 out of 4 college students are being put on SSRI drugs in the colleges? Did you ever hear that report?
I've heard that report, and it does tally with the overall general use of antidepressant SSRIs in the general population. It's about 25%. I didn't see the actual report. Is it being mandated? Are these kids being forced to take these medications?
Well, no. See, they're at school, and like you said, you were having a divorce, you were feeling a little down, and next thing you know, they're prescribing you drugs. Well, that's what the kids in school are doing. You know, they're having a test, and they're feeling, of course, anxious or worried and concerned about this test. Then they send them to the counselor, and the counselor's like, "Oh, well, we're gonna give you this," because they got a book of 300 different ailments that they could prescribe medications for. You know, so then they turn around and they're like, "Well, we're going to give you this drug." Well, then the kid takes this drug. You know, just these counselors, just these on-campus psychology centers, and they're putting them on drugs immediately. And then the kid gets side effects from that, then they go back. Okay, well, then they give them more drugs. Next thing you know, the kid's in either a basket case or committing suicide or worse, or what's worse than suicide, but something else. So that's what they're doing in that portion. And Al Whitney, that does a program on RBN, she thought the report was so good that she played it on her program. So I urge your listeners to look that up. Originally on Alex Jones, John Rappaport, and then Al Whitney about 5 weeks ago, I think she did.
We're gonna have to hunt that one down there because, we did a story a couple of years ago, a tragic example of how this works. A perfectly normal, healthy young lady. This is in Great Britain, and she goes to her doctor, and the doctor says, "How are you feeling?" She's a little depressed, and he gives her a medication, and she has a really bad adverse reaction. And she comes on back, and they say, "All right, well, let's try this other medication." She had a bad reaction on that one. And in a matter of only a few months, this woman went from a perfectly functional, happy human being to requiring permanent incarceration in a mental home. And it was all driven by these chemicals.
That's what they're doing. That's their purpose, to make us loony and controllable, to be with the fluoride, to keep us sedated, and the story you did with the oxytocin with the migrants. I mean, that's ridiculousness. You know, to have to drug you to like somebody else, forget it. Either it's happening or it's not. You know, next thing you know, they're going to put Cupid out there so everyone has a pair.
Well, you know, not too long ago, there was a claim scientist who were working on a chemical that they could spray on a crowd that would suspend their sense of disbelief. They would just listen to what the politician or the car salesman was saying and just believe it without question. So I don't know how much progress they made on that. Anyway, Rob, got to let you go. We're running out of time. We've got 2 more callers I need to get through. Brian in Chile, thank you for being so patient and waiting so long. What is on your mind?
Yeah, thanks for taking my call, Mike. You know, the vocabulary, both technically and in the Patriot movement, is constantly evolving. And recently I've heard some terms, I hear them quite often, that I'm really unclear about their meaning. So, and it occurred to me that if I'm confused about them, probably a lot of your other listeners are too. So if I could, I'd like to prevail upon you to define these 3 terms that I'm constantly hearing. The first one is, Mike, what does it mean to demonetize a website?
Well, a lot of websites or videos are making money through advertising. When we make a video, we put it on YouTube, and in theory, YouTube will show advertising over our video and share the proceeds with us. When they decide that they don't want to be associated with you anymore, the demonetizing means they simply turn off the ads and the revenue stream.
Okay. Now, the second term I had is, what is meant by the term identity politics?
Identity politics is where you're basically playing on a person's sense of identity in the context of them being victimized by other groups with different identities, men against women, black against white, rich against poor, so forth and so on. And Israel certainly does that a lot with their sense of being apart from the rest of the civilization, as it were.
Okay. And then the final term I have is, what is meant by the term blockchain? A blockchain. What is that?
Okay, blockchain is a technical term regarding to the systems of encryption used by cryptocurrencies. And it's basically, it's a system of trying to guarantee that you've got secure communications to both ends of a transaction involving those cryptocurrencies.
Okay, well, that's about it. Thanks a bunch.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch to Chris in Ohio. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Michael Rivero. Hold on a second. Let me take you off speaker here.
That would probably help.
Sorry about that. I had a message here for all the forlorn, lonely people out there that listen to radio programs like this. They're desperate, you know. They have nothing else to do.
I'm sure that they have a lot of other things to do here, but what they're trying to do is find out what's going on with the country so that they can make some good decisions in terms of how to prepare for coming upsets or how they're going to vote in the next election. I don't think
about the next election. I mean, that's what most of them think. I think I know what most of them think.
Well, I'm afraid I do not. I do not.
Stuck, and there's nothing they can do.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. This is not a time for us to be just giving up and saying there's nothing we can do. There's a lot we can do. If I didn't think there was anything that we could do, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd be doing something else. I'd be doing something fun. I'd be doing something that pays a heck of a lot better than this does. But I think it's still possible to guide this country through the coming collapse and come on out with a better country on the far end, the way the Soviet Union had to go through. All right, Bob in Colorado, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Michael? Listen, just a couple things real quick. The caller one before last, he mentioned about John Rappaport. Yeah, he was on Al Whitney. It was this past Saturday on her show.
Yeah.
And it was just absolutely riveting. And she has not posted it, which is weird. It's been almost a week. And I said the 22nd. I meant to say last Saturday. But it's almost a week now that it hadn't been posted, and that's one of the only times I've never seen her not post something. So it must have been something pretty important or something. I don't know. But it was an absolutely riveting show. So you ought to take a look at that. I don't know why she didn't post it yet, but it was a great show. Have a great day.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot. Somebody actually just sent me the original John Rappaport article, so I'm putting that up right now, and you'll be able to read it at whatreallyhappened.com. But it is basically how colleges have been turned into basically prescription psychiatric drug-selling centers. And, boy, that's a very, very scary idea. The idea that 25% of college kids are being put on these drugs, and it's just another way of getting money out of them. And again, these drugs are very, very dangerous. There have been so many case studies where people are put on these medication and they have a bad reaction to it. They commit suicide, they commit a mass murder, they cause damage, they get in a car wreck. These medications, and what's really ironic and tragic is the actual mechanism by which the SSRIs are supposed to work has been shown that it doesn't actually really work. It's just another zombie drug. Put you on the drug, you feel funny, you feel pleasant, you think you're okay, and you're not. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today. And I'm looking at this John Rappaport article, and he's making some really, really good points. And he is saying that when we look at these liberal snowflakes and they need a safe space and they're suffering triggers, you find that these are the same people who have been put on these prescription antidepressants by their college mental health counselors. 25% of the kids in college are now on these medications. Isn't any wonder they're starting to act flipped out and weird? They're victims of drug assault, for lack of a better word. And many of these drugs do produce an exaggerated and distorted sensitivity to your environment. Every little thing will set you off. So when we're seeing these liberal snowflakes out there saying, I'm offended, I'm this, I'm that, you're seeing a pharmacological reaction. All right, down in Texas, a federal judge, once again, Judge Ramos, has ruled against actions to implement voter ID laws in the state of Texas. Judge Ramos decreed the court has found that the SB 5 Declaration of Reasonable Impediment process does not fully relieve minorities of the burden of discriminatory features of the law. Basically, this is a farce. It ensures illegal voting will continue to take place all across the country. Look at the numbers Judicial Watch came up with. Huge numbers of votes that can't be explained by the legal voters in this country. Far more votes than people actually legally eligible to vote. I mean, in every single state, you need to show a photo ID to buy alcohol, to buy cigarettes, to open a bank account, to apply for food stamps, to apply for welfare, to apply for Medicaid, Social Security, to drive by or rent a car, apply for a mortgage, a lot of places just to rent. And yet, we're continually being told by the Democrats that forcing somebody to show a photo ID to vote is discriminatory. Why? These minorities are able to get the photo ID for the alcohol and the tobacco and the food stamps and the welfare and everything. This is just the Democrats trying desperately to maintain their little vote fraud mechanism. And it's pretty pathetic. It really is. And I know that Donald Trump set up that committee for election integrity. They'd better start doing something. They'd better start doing it before the midterms next year, or the Democrats will take the Congress. And after that, they will go after Donald Trump and his agenda. And I can't imagine that Donald Trump is just okay with that. Knowing that the election fraud is going to continue next year, and certainly in 2020, when he's running again for the White House, he can't be so naive as to believe that he's going to be able to beat the election fraud twice in a row, especially having turned on his own base with the wars in Afghanistan. We have to get back honest, accountable elections in this country, or it is truly lost. All right, there's the music. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller's program. He's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, aloha, America.